Hello, this is Isaac Kemp, Motor Learning Final Project, Week 8. Today we're going to be talking about teaching a skill to a novice. And this motor skill that we're going to be teaching is the offensive block in football. When teaching a novice, you want to be able to correct errors or identify errors and different things like that. One way we can do that is with degrees of freedom. What degrees of freedom allows us to do is limit and isolate or restrict certain body parts, joints, muscles, or whatnot, so we can look closely at the technique and then build on from there. So the athlete here is going to be demonstrating different phases of the offensive block as we restrict the joints and muscles and different things in the degrees of freedom. There will be a release order that we follow through the different phases. At points of time in the video, he will demonstrate the technique. I'll talk him through it, and we'll cover the different phases and portions of it as we go through the degrees of freedom, what it means and what we're actually doing. So without further ado, this is Preston, and he's going to be the offensive lineman for this drill. The first part of the exercise that we're going to do in teaching the novice the offensive block is phase one. Phase one, he is going to be on both knees on curled toes. So it's going to look like this. We are restricting his full range of motion. All we're allowing him to use is his curled toes for explosion and leverage, and his arms in the punch. So the first phase of this, he's going to explode off of his curled toes and punch the bag and fall to the ground. Sit it. Sit it. Sit it. Okay. So he's using only his curled toes for explosion and leverage, and his hands and arms for the punch. The body, we restricted his hips, parts of his back, mostly upper back, and other ranges of motion. So we can take a look at errors and different things because the punch is a very important part of the block. So the second phase of this, we're going to release some of his body parts and joints and different things like that. So he's going to start in a 3-point stance. We're allowing him to use 2 platform feet in the second phase. He's in a good 3-point stance, and he's going to punch and hold without taking a step. We are restricting the step because we want to focus on the punch, adding the hips and the curled back. So it'll look like this. Sit it. You can see there's a little bit of error, so we're going to rep it until he can get it right. Sit it. Good. Sit it. Good. Sit it. Good. If I was a master bag holder, it would help. The third part of this is now we're going to allow him to use an inside step. Everything else will be the same. So now we're releasing one of his feet, which will be his inside foot, which will be the left foot in this case. So we're releasing this and allowing him to use that. Sit it. One step. Sit it. One step. Sit it. One step. Very good. All right. So again, just to refresh, we started off and we restricted most of his joints, most of his muscle groups, most of his gross motor skills. We allowed him to use curled toes and hands, and arms. Then we allowed him to use platform feet with no step. Then we incorporated the step. Now we're going to incorporate full range of motion. And again, degrees of freedom can help with identifying errors and stuff like that, technique issues. And as the athlete gets better, you will release more of the degrees of freedom to allow him to get to the full-on technique. So the full-on technique will be everything. It will be from a 3-point stance with the step. He's going to hit the bag, executing a good punch, and he's going to drive for 5. He will probably drive me out of the video screen, but I'm going to show it from this range and I'm going to show it from a different range. But again, pay attention to his technique, and his ability to use all of his gross motor and releasing all the degrees of freedom that we talked about. So here we go. Get a 3-point stance and punch, drive for 5. Sit it. Good. Sit hit. Good. We're going to turn one time this way. We'll do the same thing. Yep. From the back. Sit hit. Good. One more time. Sit hit. Good. All right, again, teaching a novice the offensive block to start slow, using the degrees of freedom as we go through the different phases. Look at his technique to make sure everything's being done right. As he gets better, as we get more reps and more practice, we'll release joints, we'll release muscle groups, we'll release lower body, upper body until we get to the full range of motion in the block. And this is something we can always come back to throughout the season or the year and use for athletes of all positions. So again, releasing the degrees of freedom, it's about identifying errors and honing technique. So the next portion of this video, we're going to be talking about practice and practice schedule, planning, and different things like that. When we're teaching a technique, we're going to be talking specifically about block practice or block training and variant practice or variant training. What block training is, focuses on technique, really. It's a technique focused practice planned. It's good early football season, preseason, postseason, or just teaching a technique at a club or a school or something like that, or individual training in this setting. What we're going to do is shift to the other side of the ball, because skills that offensive linemen have are the same skills that defensive linemen have. So there's times during football where an offensive lineman may go to the other side of the ball and play defense. Well, those skills transfer. The punch is very important part of the offensive block, and you'll see that the punch is also a very important part of the defensive scheme. So we're going to be focusing on the defensive skills of the punch, club, and rip, and then going into the rush. So as we focus more on block training or block practice, you're going to see a lot of repetition, and that's what we'll do is rep until we get to the next phase of the technique that we want to do, and then we'll rep again and again until the athlete masters the technique or until we've reached whatever goals. And then we'll add variant practice to it. What variant practice is, we'll add different elements, we'll add different stimuli and just different distractors or indicators or whatnot, and really take that technique to a game-like situation. And what that'll do for the athlete is open up the different motor programs that he may have already developed, new stimuli, reaching in and grabbing schemas that he's already built cognitively, and gone and transferred all of that stuff into the final technique or whatnot. Speaking of the stages of learning, cognitive is basically, the beginner stage where you're learning cognitively, and it's basically the stage where you have a novice learner or beginner learner, grassroots kind of, where you're teaching the basics of the technique so they can learn and feel how the body moves and different things like that. As you go into the associative stage, we're going to be also doing a lot of reps, but the technique might not be great, but still we're learning and developing and grabbing things from our long-term memory or short-term memory and putting them into play. And then when we get to the autonomous stage, that's when the athlete has been doing it for a while, his technique is good, and his body, his movement just responds without even thinking. All right, so going back to the beginning, we're now on defense, and we're going to be talking about putting pressure on the ball carrier, disrupting plays, and we're going to be focusing on block training or block practice through our technique build up here until we reach a point where we can transfer into the variant stages of learning. So The athlete here, what we're going to do first is he's going to assume a three-point stance. He already knows the three-point stance. He already knows the defensive position. He's going to execute a punch. He's going to punch the bag, and it's going to look just like this. That's it. Good. That's it. Good. That's it. Good. All right. Now with the punch, what he's doing is he's using his arms and that punch and the step and all that technique that we talked about on the offensive side of the ball that's transferred to the defensive side of the ball, and he's creating separation. The next element of the technique is going to be adding the club. The club is going to help him disengage the offensive block and keeping his separation by disengaging the defender. So it'll look just like this. Is it hit? Good. Is it hit? Good. Now give me two to this side, camera side. Is it hit? Good. Is it hit? Good. Okay. Now, we've covered the first two parts of it, and again, we'll be focusing more on block training. All right, so the first phase in that punch, we would rep that and rep it and rep it and rep it until we reached our goal or we are satisfied, and then we would add the club to it. And the club also, we're repping that because we're focused on technique and we're still in the block training phase. He's executed the punch, he's executed the club. Now we're gonna add the rip to it, and we're still in the block training phase where we're just repping and repping and working on technique. So it'll look like this. Again, the defensive movement for this motor skill is the rush using the punch, club, rip technique. All right, you're gonna punch, club, and rip all the way through. So hit. Good. Make sure you get that rip. So hit. Good. Give me one more to this side and one more to that side. So hit. Gotta get that rip in there. So hit. Okay, good. So that would be the third phase in our block training session. As you can see, there was some errors, some technique issues. So we would again rep it in a block training concept until we were satisfied with the athlete's performance. We've covered the punch, the club, and the rip in a block training session. So now we're going to move over to variant training. And what variant training is, we're going to add different elements to the techniques that he's using. What we're going to do is have him without a pad in the air. We use a lot of air techniques without pads or contact to limit concussions and injuries. So he's going to be executing his technique in the air, and it'll look just like this. Rip or just club? Punch, club, and rip. Is that it? Okay, good. Back. All right. So what we're going to do here now, because we're in the variant stage, is I'm going to add different elements to it to, reach into his stimuli, make him think, give him the opportunity to read, plan, and do, because that's what variant training, the theory of it, is all about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand here. Go ahead and back those cones up about a half yard. That's good. So I'm going to assume the position of if I were the quarterback. On hit, I'm gonna go left. He's gonna execute his punch, club, rip, and he's going to work down the line to the direction that I'm running as I was assimilated back, carrying the ball to the left. Then we're gonna do it to the right, and then I'm going to drop back as if I was a quarterback in the pass, and you will see him do his punch, club, rip, and then drop back into a 45 and yell pass to make the practice more game-like scenario. So here we go. We're gonna go to the left first. hit. Go to your left this time. Sit it. Good. All right. Now, if I'm the quarterback of the pass, I'm going to drop back. You're going to recognize pass, right? Read, plan, do. Yell pass, 45 degrees back, drop it back in pass coverage. Here we go. So hit. Pass. Good. One more time. So hit. Pass. Good. All right. Again, when it comes to practice, block training is very good because you can focus on technique and reps. It does slow the learner down, so learning kind of is mitigated. When you move into variant training where you're adding different elements into it, you're going to allow the athlete to really think more and surprise them with different aspects of the game and allow them to read things, allow them to plan, through the central nervous system, get their brain working, get their body moving, and then do. Okay, so again, variant training really supports the read, plan, do concept, but block training is more for rep, technique, and limits that high power of thinking when you're trying to learn or hone a technique for performance for an athlete.